Okay. Hi, Mike. How are you?
I'm well, sir. How are you?
Doing great. Thank you. Thank you for coming on the show. Nice to have you here. As we were just talking about before we got on, you said that you live in rural Appalachia. That is a very beautiful part of our country. I've been through there.
It is. It's one of the most beautiful parts. I've lived all over the United States, and I think this is probably my favorite place that I've lived.
So, without giving away your home address, are you in Kentucky or West Virginia?
I'm in very southeast Ohio, close to the West Virginia border.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, it's a very nice area. Unfortunately, it's a very poor area of America.
It is. We are in, I think, the second or third poorest county in Ohio, which makes it one of the poorest in the country. So it's a very interesting place to be. We're very near a university. So that difference between the two worlds is very apparent here.
Do you have a lot of Amish people where you live?
We do. There are two communities on either side of our village.
I always found them to be quite interesting. I don't know if I could live like that, but
Well, they're very funny. We had some of them. One of the groups recently did the roof on our garage, and we were talking to him, and I was trying to explain to him some political things that were going on in Ohio, and he started talking about the other Amish group nearby, and he paused and he said, "Of course, we're the more progressive ones." And I just thought, I can't imagine what your life must be when you think you're the most progressive
oh.
sect of your particular faith. It was very interesting.
So why was he the more progressive one? I mean, they don't use electricity, they don't use any sort of machinery or something, right?
Well, so that's what's interesting. They will use it if they're working. So they're allowed to use electrical driven tools when they put the roof on our house. They drove everything here in a tractor. So they can do it if it's part of their work. And that's what he was referring to. He said, you wouldn't have been able to hire the other group because they're not allowed to work in cities. Now, our village is under 200 people. Nobody would consider this a city, but that Amish group apparently considers our little village a city. And so they're not allowed to do work for anybody here.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. The whole experience was interesting. This is a whole nother topic, but before they did the work on our roof, they called us over there, and we thought it was to pick out a color for the metal. And it was actually because they wanted to give us a lecture on being a married gay couple. And so it was very strange being a 55-year-old man being lectured about your lifestyle by a 20-year-old Amish fellow.
Were they nasty about it, or?
Not at all. What had happened was my husband had left a message for them in which he referred to himself as my husband. And I guess that was the first time they realized. And so they asked us to explain what that meant. And I said, well, it means exactly what it says on the tin. It means we're married. And they had to tell us that, this was unacceptable to God. And so I said, well, if you don't want to work on our roof, that's certainly up to you. And they said, oh, no, we don't discriminate against anybody. We just need you to know that this is unacceptable to God. And I ended up talking to them for almost 2 hours about what they believe and what, we believe and the differences and things like that. But it was definitely a unusual experience to have at this age.
Okay, so they were basically saying, we don't approve, but.
Yes, that's exactly what it was. I think their exact words were, we need you to know that this is offensive to God. Now, I grew up with a very religious family and in a very religious world. So absolutely none of this was any surprise to me whatsoever. But again, it's a very odd thing to have, experience at this age of my life.
Well, but they were respectful and they did the work and they took your money.
Oh, absolutely. They couldn't have been nicer. And at the end of it, they said, you know, you're lovely people to work for, and we'd love to work for you again. And I come to find out they had done the very same thing to a lesbian couple in town. They said, essentially, they said, we don't approve of who you are, who you are, but we loved working with you. And
you know, I think in this country, the way we're so divided, I think tolerance is just where we need to be. They don't have to live your lifestyle. You don't have to impose your lifestyle on them. But everybody needs to just have a certain middle ground where people can get along, they can do business, and everybody goes home to their significant other, whatever gender they may be.
yeah, that's exactly what it was. I mean, I had the option, you know, when this first happened, of saying, I won't work with these people, you know, they're homophobic or whatever. But they're not. It's a much longer conversation. But I said to the father, there's a father and two sons, and I said to the father, what would happen if one of your boys came to you and said, you know, Father, I'm gay? And he said, well, that wouldn't happen because there's no such thing. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, God would never make anyone be homosexual. So if you believe you're homosexual, you're just believing a lie. And I would just explain to them that this was not true, and they would then understand that they were mistaken, and it would all just go away.
Oh, interesting. Well, I guess this is kind of on topic because we do want to get to your books before the show runs out. You've got a book called Every Star That Falls, and this is a sequel to Suicide Notes. And according to your bio, it says it took you 15 years to write the sequel. Why did it take so long?
Well, it didn't take me 15 to write it. It took me 15 to get to the point where I thought there should be one. I don't normally do sequels because what I find is that readers fall in love with characters, and in their heads, they have an idea of what happens to them when the book is over. And so no matter what you do in a sequel, someone's going to be disappointed. And I just thought I'd rather that people went and decided for themselves what happens to Jeff, the main character of Suicide Notes, when he gets out of the psychiatric hospital that he's in for the entirety of that book. So I never even thought about writing a sequel. And then what happened was social media came along, and a 15-year-old book just became more and more popular. And I got more and more letters from people saying, what happens? I want to know what happens, and what happens to these other characters. So finally, my editor and I said, well, maybe we need to do this after all. So that's why it took 15 years. It was just coming to a place where I believed that it was time to do this.
So let's go back to Suicide Notes. So without giving away the whole thing, because we want people to buy the book, after all. So this is a fiction?
Well, yes. The things that happened to Jeff in Suicide Notes did not happen to me. A lot of the events that caused him to be in the hospital did. So he's essentially a stand-in for me, although my life never became quite that dramatic.
So am I safe to assume that Jeff is struggling with his sexuality and he tries to commit suicide?
He is, although that's what's interesting to me about the book is that's not really why he attempts suicide. It's more because he doesn't know how to deal with an issue in his closest friendship that led to that moment.
So the follow-up, he gets out of the institution?
Yeah, so Suicide Notes ends the day before he's getting out, and the new book, Every Star That Falls, starts with him coming home. So even though 15 years went by in the writing, it picks up literally the same day.
Okay, is this one out now? Every Star That Falls?
Yes. Mm-hmm. It came out yesterday.
Oh, yesterday. All right. I was going to ask you how's it doing, but we might be a little premature if it just came out yesterday.
I really don't know. I would like to know, kind of, but we'll see.
What was the reception like for Suicide Notes? Was it good?
Well, that's what's interesting. So it's very unusual for a YA novel to be around 15 years after it came out. When Suicide Notes came out, it had a very mixed response. There were starred reviews and there were less enthusiastic reviews. And there were people who said, how dare you write a book about a gay kid who tries to commit suicide? And there were people who said, thank you for writing a book about a gay kid who tries to commit suicide. So it was very, very mixed. It did not become a bestseller by any stretch of the imagination. And it wasn't until the last 3 years when social media really took off, and in particular, Barnes & Noble. Somebody at Barnes & Noble took a great interest in this book, and they made it part of their, I don't know, some kind of sales program, and suddenly it became a bestseller.
We've heard a lot about books that end up on the burn lists for schools, that they don't want certain subject matters in their libraries. Have you experienced any of that with your book?
Not with that book. Curiously enough, my first big book was a very straightforward nonfiction book called 100 Questions and Answers About AIDS. And it came out, I think it was the first book for young adults on this topic. And so it became the book on it, everywhere. And that year, it was one of the top 10 most banned books. And it was very funny because my family, who never really understood what I did, saw some news report where my book was listed alongside, I think, Beloved by Toni Morrison or something like that. And that's what got them excited. They were like, your book is on a list with Toni Morrison. I said, well, yeah, because it's being banned in schools, and that was my first experience with that.
They were banning a book that was a nonfiction about AIDS? That seems counterintuitive.
It included information on safer sex and safer intravenous drug use were the big issues with that. And they didn't want anyone talking about sex. And it's interesting. I did a radio show around that time, and a woman called in and she said, I don't want my children reading any books with gay people in them. And I said, why not? And she gave the most honest answer I've ever had anyone give me, which is, I'm afraid if they know gay people exist, then they'll want to be them. And I thought, that's interesting. So you would rather pretend that things don't exist because you somehow think that will make your kids not. It's like the Amish fellow saying there's no such thing as gay people, right? Like, so once you understand there's no such thing as gay people, well, then you won't want to be one. That's essentially what she was saying too. And I think that's what all of this banning is about. They don't want kids particularly to know that these things are options for them.
That's interesting. So with that logic, then, I should think that there are no such thing as a billionaire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. And now I get it. I've had older people say to me, well, it just never occurred to me that I could be a lesbian. And that sounds bizarre. And they don't literally mean literally be a lesbian. They mean I didn't think I could be a lesbian and have a happy life that's fulfilling and all of that sort of thing. But it's a variation on that theme. It's oh, I didn't know this was an option for me.
That's odd because, I don't think being gay is an option. I think it's just the way people are born.
Well, yeah, exactly.
So,
and I sort of get it. I mean, I guess if you have certain feelings or inclinations or something, and you've never seen or heard about anyone else who has them, maybe you might think, well, this is just temporary or will go away. I don't know, but just to erase things so that you hope people don't acknowledge.
Well, that's living in denial. But in any event, Michael, we are running out of time. We've got to wrap this up. So the new book is called Every Star That Falls. You said it released yesterday. Last question, do you have a website you want to give out?
I do. It's michaelthomasford.com. It has information on all the books and links to the other social media.
Well, thank you for coming on the show. This was a nice conversation. Best of luck with the book. I hope it does well. Are you planning on writing a third part to this?
I would love to. I think that will depend on how well this one does, but I have one planned. I know what would happen if I get to do it, so let's hope.
Okay, great. Well, again, thanks for coming on the show. Best of luck.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for having me.